Hi, friends. We are a little
Hi.
bit late due to technical difficulties, but we are here. We hope that you will wait while we do some sharing on Facebook for a few minutes. Hello, Lana. Hi, Dolores.
Hey, ladies. I owe Alana a phone call. I haven't talked to her in days.
Well, she's a good one to talk to, so.
I know it. She's getting very, very special to me. I love her.
Oh, good. That is very good. Okay.
Thank you, Dolores, for always being here, too, and first one every time.
Yeah, Dolores I should say Dolores specialize in that. I had Devora on my mind. That's my daughter, of course.
Right, right. Where does Devora live? In proximity to you guys?
No, Devora
No.
lives in L.A.
Oh, she's a West Coaster too, huh?
She's a West Coaster too. She went out there in 2016 to try to break into films because she's an actor and has been for many years. And she was local here for many years, but then she decided she was going to try to go to Hollywood and live there. She also thought she would like the climate out there better. She likes it hot. So I think she's been pretty happy out there, actually.
That's good to hear.
She seems to like it. And she is getting a lot of auditions, so she likes that too.
That's great. Well, good luck to her. I would love to see her on this big screen, get a big movie break. That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, why not, right? That's what you do, what you love. That's what's important. That's what I told my kids anyway.
Yeah, that's what's important as long as the oligarchs leave you alone.
Yeah, that is the kind of the secret, right? Flying under the radar to some extent.
Either flying under the radar or, perhaps what you do doesn't offend them for some reason or other.
Let me entertain you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, historically, a lot of artists have made a living that way and have produced some really great art, after all, while being supported by their patrons.
So she's acting, but she obviously would have to be doing some other things, right? So what else is she doing?
She's a professional also, okay, at web work. Uh,
She's a techie. Okay, makes a lot of sense.
yeah, she's a techie. Specifically, what she does is she tests the websites to see whether they are compliant with Section 508 and friendly to handicapped people.
Oh, great.
That is her particular niche. She's been doing that for years. She's quite expert at that. And she does well at that after a good many years.
That's fabulous.
So that's also what she can use to sustain herself while she tries to get a big break in films.
That's really great.
It is. I'm really proud of Devora. She's a terrific person.
I don't think you can ask for much more than being proud of your kids. I
That's
think
true.
that's what life's all about, right? I mean, sure, people don't have children, and I get all of that. But as a mother, I think that is the one thing. I want them to be happy, of course. I want them to be happy, and just feel like you beat the odds.
That's right, because the odds are very long these days.
Yeah, and getting longer by the minute. So,
So here
as
we are.
yeah,
Here we are. We've actually started up. There's Dolores, both at Facebook and on YouTube, and there's Kay on YouTube. Thank you for coming to YouTube, Kay. And Lana said, greetings to all. Please give a brief explanation of SALT. Some people might not be familiar. Thanks. I will do that, but I will do that a little later in the broadcast. I want to start with New Zealand because
salt is on the agenda, Lana. You're reading minds this evening.
Okay, so let's start with New Zealand because it's in part it's really so outstandingly ridiculous. There was a piece which appeared in Common Dreams. What was the date? Today, November 17th. It was by Joshua Cho. And let me share that for you so you can see it. So the US and the UK press have taken to mocking New Zealand and what they've accomplished in the COVID area. And so let me scroll down and sort of give you what they say. Headline is that the US and UK press mock New Zealand's incredibly successful COVID response. That headline is very truthful because their response has been truly incredibly successful. So, when New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced the company's transition away from its coronavirus elimination strategy, also known as zero COVID, US and British media outlets framed the decision as a recognition of the inevitable failure of an irrational goal. And I can tell you that that goal did not seem to be an irrational one for the very, very longest time, because as we've gone through on this program quite frequently, they were accomplishing management of the COVID situation to such a degree they had only 5 fatalities per million people. They had lost 26 people on the whole, right up to recently, I guess about a month ago or so. And for the longest time, they were stuck at 25 deaths, and they added a death, so it was 26 deaths out of the 5 million people who lived there. But that wasn't the full measure of their success. The full measure of their success was that for most of New Zealand, through all this time, and they began to get COVID cases about the same time as we did here in the United States, they had a situation where, for most people in New Zealand, their lives were normal. They could work. They didn't have to wear masks in most situations. They could go to sport stadia. They could go to places, where people gathered. They could have their family gatherings. The way this was accomplished, okay, was really very simple. They developed a policy, a very vigorous response to any outbreak of COVID at all. When one case was reported, they would do is jump on that case. They would isolate the person, okay, that had that case and the family of the person that had that case. And they would lock down the area. In other words, a local area, small local area, okay, was knocked down um, till the COVID had passed. Then they would open up that local area and continue to live until COVID popped up again. And then they would do the same thing. And they just stamped it out everywhere. And for a very long time, their economy was normal. Their lives were normal. The only thing they had to worry about was traveling, okay, to other nations. When they traveled to other nations and then came back, they would have to isolate and quarantine for 14 days.
Right.
As would tourists to New Zealand. They would have to come in and they would have to quarantine for 14 days. Now, they provided actually rather luxurious accommodations for the people who had to quarantine. Nice hotel rooms, very good food. The rooms had extremely good accommodations. Of course, you had to stay there for the 14 days. But after that, you were free to go anywhere in the country. And your life was normal
Mm-hmm.
in New
They,
Zealand. So
they did,
while,
they did vigorous contact tracing of those individuals that were all quarantined.
yes, very vigorous and very successful.
Hello. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And they did that for the longest time. Okay. Then the Delta variant came to them. And because of the higher contagion of the Delta variant, they had to reconsider, okay, what they were doing. So to go on, but to go on with the article, which appeared, okay, in the London Times. Actually, I'm quoting now, okay, from the London Times, October 4th, 2021. Okay, the Times made its analysis clear in the headline: New Zealand abandons absurd zero COVID strategy after failure to stop the Delta strain. So you're reading this quote, okay, and you're thinking, oh my God, what must have happened in New Zealand? First of all, in that sentence is encapsulated the silliness, okay, of that article. Obviously, the zero COVID strategy was not, okay, an absurd strategy because it produced the results of 5 fatalities per million, while pretty much keeping life at a normal tenor in that state. And they did this for months and months and months on end. So then they talk about the failure to stop the Delta strain. So we're talking the early part of October. So today I went to the statistics at the Worldometer site, and I wanted to see just how bad it had gotten for New Zealand. And what I discovered was, starting with Actually, November 6th. In other words, when that article appeared, they had actually between September 4th and October 4th, they had suffered 2 more deaths. So their figure of total deaths went from 26 to 27, okay, in the month and a half, okay, between August 20th, okay, and October 8th. Okay.
So Arden is making them look really bad, is what this is about.
Well, what happened is that there were really hardly any deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Delta variant was starting to appear there, but between August 20th and October 7th case, it only 2 more people died. So the average was still 5.5 fatalities per million up to that time. Then for most of October, things were quiescent. Then on November 6th, there were 2 deaths. On November 8th, there was 1 death. Let me see, let me get that. Yes, on November 11th, there was a death. Okay, and on the 16th, okay, of November, there were deaths. So between November 6th, okay, and November 11th, there were 5 deaths in New Zealand. Not exactly a raging pandemic compared to the United States, even then, or compared to almost any other country.
And since it was written, this article was written by the London Times, let's just, for good measure, make sure we throw in the UK in there.
Yeah, we're going to go through some of the other articles. But when they were talking about after the failure to stop the Delta strain, as far as I can see, there was no failure. They were still enormously successful. So today, to look at these figures, okay, as an overall number, we're still talking about fatalities per million have gone up from 5 to 8, okay, at this point. I believe it's 5 to 8. I will double check that, okay, in a minute.
Well, and I think that the big thing here is that they got out in front of this immediately. They were prepared. They had their public health infrastructure in place, and they were able to go at it from a locality outbreak, right? And vigorous contact tracing.
Right, and they were ruthless about it.
Yeah.
They were ruthless about it. They knew what they wanted to do was to maintain the public health of their people.
Exactly.
And that is what they did. That is.
And they did that. They didn't have to do sweeping, massive lockdowns.
Exactly. They didn't have to shut down the whole economy of the country or even large parts of the economy of the country. It was all in the local areas. And most people did not have to wear any masks. The public events, okay, were able to go on. People were able to go to stores, okay, act in a normal fashion in stores. In other words, New Zealand daily life was hardly disturbed, but through the policies of Ardern. She was enormously successful. Okay. And I said that the fatalities had gone up to 8 per million. I was mistaken. They went up to 7 per million. So they rose during this period of time from 5 per million to 7 per million. I certainly don't consider that, okay, to be any kind, okay, of failure. And to put this in perspective,
Yeah, where are we at?
we have to be clear what was going on in some of the other nations. Of course, in China, they also followed a similar strategy and they ruthlessly suppressed COVID. And they did about 3 deaths per million, with an enormous population, of course, 1.4 billion people. But when we get to Western countries, okay, so the United States is no longer in the top 10 worst countries. We have slowed down somewhat. So now we are the 20th worst in the world. We have 2,360 fatalities per million. So what does New Zealand have now? 2,360 per million divided by 7. Sorry, the lighting here is no good. That makes us 337 times worse than what the New Zealanders actually accomplished in their nation. So these Western papers are trying to make fun, have fun of the New Zealanders. We lost, okay, according to this official record here at the Worldometer site, 787,457 people. We know that figure is way over 1 million if you look at the analysis that's been done by the Institute of Health Metrics Evaluation, at the University of Washington. We look at our daily total of deaths. Just yesterday, we still had 1,025 deaths. If we project that out for a total per month, we're still running at 25 to 30,000 deaths per month. That's 360,000 fatalities per year. I mean, that's just incredible. It's scandalous. But the big statistic is the comparison of the 2,360 fatalities per million to the 7 fatalities per million. Now let's get back to the article. Okay. The outlet highlighted the contrast between Ardern's approach and that of her Australian counterpart, Scott Morrison. Till today, Ardern had remained committed to the elimination strategy, despite the view of her Australian counterpart, Scott Morrison, that such a goal was absurd. But let's consider the context. Jacinda Ardern is a female socialist prime minister. Scott Morrison is a male neoliberal conservative prime minister. Okay. He is calling Ardern her policies absurd compared to Australia's policies. When we look at a comparison of those two countries, and by the way, Australia has done well. I'm not saying that it hasn't done well. But Australia has 74 fatalities per million. Until recently, they were trying a strategy of lockdowns too, and being very strict. When COVID popped up, they moved quickly to try to get rid of it as well. Their policies were never as vigorous, as the New Zealand policies were. But compared to the rest of the world, they were very, very good. And Australia's fatalities per million is very, very good today compared to the rest of the world. It's 74 fatalities per million. But that's still 10 times worse than the New Zealand record. So here are these press people, and they are saying, uh, they're contrasting the view, okay, of Morrison, who characterizes uh, the New Zealand program as absurd when it performed 10 times as well as his program. So the London Daily Mail reported on New Zealand's transition in more triumphalist terms, stating, New Zealand has finally acknowledged what most other countries realized long ago, that it cannot completely eradicate COVID. Jacinda Ardern is abandoning her draconian zero COVID strategy after admitting she cannot stop the spread of the Delta variant with lockdown measures that are harsh and aggressive contact tracing. So they call her policies draconian. And they say she admitted she cannot stop the spread, okay, of the Delta variant with the kinds of measures that she had used before. But when we look at the numbers, we see that her fatalities per million rose from 5 to 7 at that time, during the period, okay, of the Delta variant.
Per million.
Australians, um,
5%, from 5 per million to 7 per million.
to 7 per million, while Australia's rose from 38 per million to 74 per million.
She beat the pants off of everybody.
She beat the pants off of everybody, and she beat the pants off the Australians who were making fun of her. And she delivered a normal life for New Zealand and its people. Anyway, Nick Perry in the London Daily Mail wrote, New Zealand admits it can no longer get rid of coronavirus. What a distortion that is of the reality for New Zealand. In other words, it admits it can no longer eliminate it, sure, but it hasn't admitted that it can no longer control it. And it's still experiencing levels of success that are found in only a handful of nations across the world.
They have one, there's one thing that I will say I believe to be in their advantage, Joe, and that is there are fewer reasons to be flying in to New Zealand to do business than there are reasons to be flying into the US or into the UK, right? I mean,
Sure.
I do want to point that out. It's also part of the reason why Australia, although both of these countries have robust public health systems, they have national single-payer health care, for lack of better terms.
Absolutely.
And so they're way ahead of us on that issue to start with. But they do have kind of a luxury of their continental placement and the travel, right? But from the very beginning, you have to you find a small cluster outbreak, you've got to quarantine, and you've got to contact trace. And then you've got to quarantine everybody who came into contact. And that is really how you do it. And if you don't do that, you're the horse is out of the barn.
The horse is out of the barn, yeah, and you're going to lose people, and you're going to lose people unnecessarily. It's really unnecessary. Okay, that's the truth of the matter. Between New Zealand and China, though both of those societies are very different, they did use the vigorous suppression and contact tracing strategies. They both did. And the strategies worked for both of them. And even though you point out there are not so many reasons to fly into New Zealand, there are a huge number of reasons to fly into China.
Or out of,
Right. Okay. Or
Both
out of
ways.
China, and people were doing both of those things. And the Chinese still contained it to 3 fatalities per million using their methods. So taking both nations together and looking at the record in both of those nations, you'd have to say that the strategies they followed, yes, they did not completely eliminate the disease, but they sure controlled it so that it was not as important a part of life as it is here. And they did it while saving those lives, all those lives. It's interesting also to look at Taiwan. Let me see if I can find how bad things got in Taiwan, because they were besieged by the Delta variant, okay, as well. For a while, they were competing with the New Zealanders. At one point, for months on end, they had something like three tenths of a fatality per million. Taiwan has 24 million people. It's 5 times the size of had New Zealand in population. So it had, substantial population. And furthermore, quite a big part of their population would go home to China for the period of the New Year celebration.
Yeah.
They would go to visit their families, and then they would come back to Taiwan. For a while, it looked like Taiwan had lost control of it. Their fatalities per million were jumping. They got into the 30s, but they clamped down on it again, and today they're at 36 fatalities per million in Taiwan. Their total fatalities are only 848 out of 24 million people. That's nothing. That's wonderful performance. And at this point, it's twice as good as Australia.
So did
Taiwan,
they deploy like a massive sweeping curfews and things like that, or did they have a more New Zealand approach, or don't you really know?
they had very much like the New Zealand approach there.
Okay. So their lives did not go upside down.
No, their lives did not go upside down. Lots of people were reporting from Taiwan about how normal life was, how you could go into restaurants, how you didn't have to wear masks
They stayed at work.
in restaurants. Of course, in certain situations, they did have to exercise a normal amount of caution. When going on the trains, for example,
Right.
they were masked, on trains. So they did that, but that was pretty much the extent of it, unless there was an outbreak of COVID somewhere. And then they were very, very strict about it. That's why they've contained it to 36 fatalities per million, which is also marvelous compared to the United States. I mean, 2,390 fatalities per million compared to 36. And we overlook that. Our newspapers are not honest in terms of evaluating the relative performance of various nations in the world. Our people do not know how our performance compares to Taiwan, to Australia, to China, to New Zealand. They just don't know. They have no information. Our media is spreading no information about how we've done compared to other nations. And there's all kind of evidence out there now that we've been a miserable failure. We may not be as much of a failure today as we were under Trump, but we're still a miserable failure. The Biden administration has not done that much better than the Trump administration. Hey, when you really look at it, here are some other interesting comparisons. I wouldn't say Canada has been a particularly good performer here, but they have 770 fatalities per million. We have, as I said, what was it?
2360. So we're 3 times, right?
Let's see.
More than 3.
Yeah, let's see precisely here. I keep scrolling this down too fast. Okay, let me get to it now. We were at 2,360. So 770 compared to 2,360. Where
700, I thought you said you said 70.
770 for Canada.
Oh, okay.
2,360 for us. We're 3 times worse than Canada. Okay, our next door neighbor. They were not as vigorous at quarantining people and contact tracing, but they did have a Medicare for all system.
Public health, strong public health system.
I'll bet that has a lot to do with the fact that they performed 3 times better than the United States. How many Americans know that Canada performed 3 times better than the United States? I mean, I'll bet almost nobody knows that. Nobody knows it. Because our press just doesn't bother to cover it. They don't think it's an important consideration. And then there's Cuba.
They put us all to shame. They had to sanction them again, didn't they?
Yeah, this is in the middle of the sanctions and everything else.
Oh, they were very mad at them, especially when they found out they were giving their vaccine away.
Right. And of course, now that's going to accelerate because the Cubans have gotten the capability to produce more of the vaccine. So they're going to give that away free to the world.
They're going to give away the capability too.
And the capability too.
They're not restricting it.
Right. They're not restricting it. So Cuba had 732 deaths per million. Now they've been hit hard, I noticed, by the Delta variant of late because they were doing much better than that. But still easily 3 times better than the United States. So I think it's important that some of these numbers be spread but to U.S. people so they can understand how badly our government has performed in protecting us from the virus. Because it really has been a miserable failure. Okay, the Associated Press said New Zealand admits it can no longer get rid of coronavirus. Similarly framed New Zealand's previous zero COVID strategy as an unusual deviation that would inevitably be failed, although it acknowledged that the elimination strategy worked remarkably well, quote unquote. Since early in the pandemic, this is a quote from the Associated Press on October 4th, New Zealand had pursued an unusual zero-tolerance approach to the virus through lockdowns and aggressive contact tracing. So CBNC reported on October 5th that New Zealand had become the latest country to abandon a zero-COVID strategy and has been, quote, notoriously strict in its tackling of COVID. As if this were a bad thing. As if this were a bad thing. At the time they wrote this, on October 5th, 2021, there was still only 5 deaths per million, okay, in New Zealand. At that time, it hadn't started to go up at all. Uh, there was one time that Ardern put the country into a strict lockdown over one coronavirus case was detected, the first caused by the Delta variant, okay, in August. So why did she do that? Well,
That's how you
they
contain
hadn't
it.
had any experience with the Delta variant, and they were afraid of it. And they wanted to make sure that it would not spread actually throughout the whole country. So at that point, they shut down the whole country until they could find out more about it. Anyway, this article from Common Dreams says, notorious, quote unquote, is an interesting way to describe New Zealand's performance, considering how frequently it featured on numerous lists of countries credited for handling the pandemic the best compared to the rest of the world prior to the outbreak of the Delta variant. News Hub, January 28, 2021. Also, New Zealand Herald, September 29, 2021. And The Guardian, October 8th of 2020. CNBC made it seem as if New Zealand was trying to maintain zero COVID forever and cites experts claiming that the highly infectious Delta variant makes such approaches futile. Even though Ardern explained that New Zealand's elimination strategy was always intended to be temporary, China, with far fewer geographic and population advantages compared to New Zealand, has managed to sustain a zero COVID approach with less than 5,000 total deaths from the virus throughout the pandemic, in a population of 1.4 billion, with nationwide cases fading to zero in August. However, it is erroneous to present the shift as a failure of New Zealand's pandemic response, or to falsely caricature their initial approach as being motivated by a naive belief they could sustain it indefinitely. Rather, countries only need to pursue these measures until a sufficient number of their population are fully vaccinated. Singapore transitioned out of its zero COVID strategy in phases after targeting an 80% vaccination rate, with the majority of their new cases not falling seriously ill due to the vaccination. Let's just take a look. Oh, I guess I closed that already. I was going to take a look at where Singapore was now. It had very low rates as well, but it had risen last time I looked at it to something like 40 fatalities per million. Of course, still very low compared to other places, but I don't know exactly where it stands today. I can look that up if anyone's interested quickly. Ardern explained her shift by citing the increased availability of vaccines, and stated that the decision to transition away from the zero COVID approach was inevitable. She said that her policy had shifted to the greater transmissibility of the Delta variant, which makes it harder to bring cases down to zero, and announced that New Zealand will be ending national lockdowns when it reaches a vaccination rate of 90%. This was from Wired magazine, October 8, 2021. So she was caricatured, in Wired magazine also. While she condemns New Zealand to perpetual lockdowns, the rest of the Western world is getting vaccinated and moving on from the virus. I can't express how ridiculous this is. This is October 8th, 2021. But the United States was still losing 1,000 people a day. They weren't even losing one person per day there in New Zealand, and they talk about the rest of the world as moving on from the virus. What the rest of the world did really is to ignore the fatalities coming from the virus, to ignore those people who were getting sick, okay, and who were dying, and to just say, la la la, we're moving on with our economy. We don't care how many people die. And the mockery and disdain for New Zealand's pandemic response was nowhere more apparent than it was widely reported the country initiated a level 4 lockdown, the highest level in New Zealand, after detecting a single Delta variant case. That was the August case I talked about, with the Delta variant on August 17th in Auckland, which is the most populous city they have, okay, in New Zealand. So, so they initiated a level 4 lockdown because they didn't want it to spread in their most populous city where it had the best chance of killing a large bunch of people. I mean, I think they were dead right to do that. So the London Telegraph on August 19, 2021, scorned New Zealand as a, quote, once a welcoming nation, unquote, turned into an, quote, isolated dystopia where liberties are taken away in a heartbeat and outsiders are shunned. Now, that is a distortion. It was always possible to go to New Zealand. You just had to tolerate the 2 weeks of quarantine. That's all. I mean, that's inconvenient, but it's not a fate, okay, that's worse than death, okay, at all. So I think it's a caricature to say it was an isolated dystopia, especially since once you got through those 2 weeks, okay, of quarantine, you could live a normal life in that country as compared to the way they had to live in London at that very same time. And in many of the European states where they're now being victimized again, okay, by the Delta variant, and such nations, okay, as Austria are initiating nationwide lockdowns to this day because they're so afraid of a new wave, okay, of COVID. They're not doing that in New Zealand now. The paper claimed a fetishization of zero risk, gave the state a limitless justification to interfere in our lives in the most extreme of ways. Arden's right-wing predecessor, John Key, wrote a widely shared op-ed in Stuff on September 26, 2021, declaring that, quote, the aim should no longer be to exist in a smug hermit kingdom, unquote, and not to, quote, continue the North Korea option, unquote. And here's a comment from Glenn Greenwald. He continued this line of thought by tweeting that Australia and New Zealand officials seem, quote, demented, okay, oblivious to the costs of sustained isolation because of the lockdown. Well, no one would accuse the Brazilians of being demented, okay, and oblivious, would they? Except, of course, that they were demented, okay, and oblivious when it came to being concerned about the fatality rates that exist in that country right now. Because as bad as the fertility rates are in the United States, at this point, when it comes to Brazil, the fatality rates, okay, are even worse. Let me just get that figure for you. So Brazil is the 9th worst in the world. Their fatality rates are at 2,851 per million.
That's a lot.
They've had 611,800 okay, and 51. And we have this smug statement from Greenwald talking about the Australian, okay, and New Zealand officials that are demented, oblivious to the cost of sustained uh, uh, isolation because of the lockdown.
That's that's a really disappointing thing to have. You know, he's taken some weird tack on this thing, because I think what people need to understand really is these governments have failed so drastically that they have to victimize and, you know, make absurd the situation in New Zealand, and you know, make it out to be some horrific uh, lockdown that was full sweeping. But the truth of the matter is, they had the infrastructure, they had a public health system, and it's the get ahead of it versus letting it get ahead of you.
Absolutely true, and of course, we have to note that the government in Brazil, of course, was certainly oblivious to the nearly 612,000 fatalities they have had in that country. And there's a lot of underreporting there. So probably they're at 800,000 or 900,000 now. They seem to be quite oblivious to the cost of this.
Well, they're not. They're. I mean, Joe. I mean, let's just call it for what it is, right? I mean, the media arm is out there to make the governments look good.
I mean,
God forbid we would have people actually up in arms about the fact that they've allowed millions of people across the world to unnecessarily be ill, contracting long-term COVID, and all these deaths. I mean, we have to remember, we've been almost a year now into vaccines, which Delta was 3 to 5 times more contagious than 19.
Right.
The Delta variant, right, which was more contagious than smallpox. And yet, because we have these vaccination rates, right, things have changed, okay? But in the same right, it is still that contagious. There's another variant out there. Let's just cross our darn fingers and hope to God it's not as contagious or worse, and that the vaccines are going to hold and that it doesn't leak again. But we've learned nothing from this.
Yeah, we've learned nothing. But again, to go back to Greenwald, he doesn't have any motive, for making the U.S. government but look good. But compared to the New Zealanders,
how do you know?
Well, because he's always making the U.S. government look bad.
Yeah, possibly, but I mean, you can't just come out and say sweepingly that there's no reason, because he's got to. There's something there. I mean, Glenn's got children, right?
There's something there, but I think he's showing, an obvious bias against the New Zealand approach.
Whatever it is, I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't understand it either, because the level of death is so great, and in these various countries, I can't see how you can simply ignore it. The bottom line, okay, is that the New Zealanders would not tolerate that level of death in their nation. They decided to protect one another, and they did it successfully. Here's another quote from the Common Dreams article. However, what critics like Greenwald omitted was that the lockdown was initially supposed to last only 3 days, and that, God bless you,
Bonnie,
and that New Zealanders have not been under sustained isolation, quote unquote, since their zero COVID approach quickly stamped out the virus in previous outbreaks. In fact, plenty of people living there have pointed out that it's hard for people outside the country to grasp how normal life has been there for most of the pandemic. That was a quote from an article in The Guardian on October 5th of 2021. That's what I've heard. It's hard for people to grasp how normal things were. And here's a straight quote from that article, okay, from The Guardian. For 18 months, New Zealanders were living life as if there were no pandemic. We were gathering outdoors in the thousands. And also, mask mandates were literally a foreign concept. And business and public services were operating more or less as normal. We were watching governments that let the virus rip with a good dose of horror. And if we're honest, a modest dose of smugness. But this is not an anecdote, a mere anecdote. One looks at the COVID-19 stringency index provided by the University of Oxford, which measures how restrictive policies are for countries by tracking various metrics like school and also workplace closures as well as travel bans. It's clear that New Zealanders have enjoyed more freedoms throughout most of the pandemic than Americans or Brazilians. Right before the latest lockdown measures in August, New Zealanders had been living normally without a single COVID case for 6 months, demonstrating that powerful measures for a brief period of time actually grant citizens more freedom and are more effective than sustained harsh measures that actually predominate in the United States and the UK. Also omitted is that the vast majority of New Zealanders were supportive of their zero COVID policies, as numerous polls in the Labour Party's landslide 2020 re-election confirm. Okay, this was from ABC, 10/8/2021, the Otago Daily Times, September 2nd, 2021. While economic activity is not a perfect proxy for normal living, it's worth noting that New Zealand's economy grew 1.0% in 2020, while the US has dropped 3.5%, and Britain's plunged by 9.8%. So that's, I think, pretty convincing.
Yeah, but for Britain, we have to remember now that they really screwed up Brexit. That's a bigger reason why they were at 9.8 than COVID was.
They really did screw up there. They really did screw up there, but it also has to be noted that right now, if you take a look at a comparison of the United States, and the UK, let me find the UK. We are 20th at 2,360 fatalities per million, and the UK is 29th at 2,097. So we have gone considerably, our fatalities per million have grown considerably faster than the UK fatalities for months now.
Well, again, they have a public health system.
Yep. Okay, so let's move on. I think the point has been made. So let's move on while we still have time to salt, shall we?
Yes. Let's talk about it.
Okay, let's talk about salt. Okay, so what is salt? That refers to state and local tax deductions on your income tax. That is, you get to take state taxes off and local taxes off. They are deductions, from your income. Now, it used to be that there were never any limits to the deduction, no limits at all. The Trump administration decided, I don't know exactly why they decided it, but they decided to limit the state and local tax deductions to $10,000 per, well, I guess it's per family or per individual, okay, or per return. I suppose it's per return. If it's a joint return, I think it's still $10,000. Okay.
You really don't have any theory as to why? You don't. I mean, you know what the offset to that was. You know why they had to do that, Joe, don't you?
Well, I don't think they had to do it. I think they might have done it because they wanted to make it look better that they had given such a large tax cut to the rich. So they decided to implement something that was going to penalize the rich, to make it seem as though Trump, wasn't always in the corner of the rich. But I'm not sure that was really the reason, because a lot of things that Trump did, was simply capricious. I'm not sure why he did this.
I think too that what gets lost in the equation there is that when they lowered that salt tax deduction, when they lowered it down, it hurt hardworking families too.
It hurt middle class families because it doesn't take too much of a house these days to have the state and local tax as well. I should say it doesn't take too much of an income these days to have your state and local taxes go over $10,000.
Right.
Okay. That can actually very easily happen. So that was victimizing some people who were middle class and who couldn't afford to lose the tax deduction. Okay, the tax deduction was important to them. And it seemed to them very unfair that a tax deduction that had always been there for them and for everybody was now suddenly limited to $10,000. It made a difference for those families.
Right.
So anyway, a good many people perceived that as unfair. And there were a group of 5 or 6 congressmen in Congress on the Democratic side who were willing to take up that cause. And they were generally congressmen who lived in high-cost areas and also higher income areas, such as New Jersey and New York, okay, and California. And so they have insisted for months now that the salt tax had to go. And they expressed it in the convenience slogan, no salt, but no deal. Okay, and they were holding the Build Back Better bill hostage. So in one version, okay, of the bill, a later version, the cap was raised from $10,000 in deductions to $80,000, okay, in deductions. So what this rise was causing was a situation where many, many rich people were now going to benefit from raising the cap from 10,000 to 80,000. So there a split came to the Democratic Party. There were many people, including Bernie Sanders, okay, who were willing to raise the cap somewhat, so middle-class people would not be included. In other words, they would get the full deduction because, say the cap was raised to 18,000 or to 20,000 or something like that. So it wouldn't touch so many families. But those few Congress people who were very much in favor of getting rid of salt wanted to get rid of the whole thing. So there was a Common Dreams article that also dealt with this. And that one was written by Jake Johnson. and it was characterized in the headline as a 285 billion tax cut for the rich is now the second most expensive piece of the Build Back Better bill. So that was the headline.
We talked about that the other day, that was going to add to the how you're going to pay for. Notice they're not crying about how are you going to pay for the salt bill. Although the CBO hasn't scored it yet, have they? Or did that happen while I was indisposed?
The CBO is probably going to decide. I think they may have decided. In other words, the result may be out.
Okay.
They now think that the reconciliation bill is not going to be actually deficit neutral. But what CBO was mainly pointing to there was not the 285 billion tax cut, but what it was actually pointing to was it felt that the Biden administration's their reliance on tightening the enforcement of the tax laws. In other words, monitoring more closely. They also included funds, in the Build Back Better bill to give more funds to the IRS to enforce the tax laws. And they thought that for every dollar spent for that, I forget what the number was, $3 or $4 or $6 would come back, in enforcement. CBO did not agree with that. And so CBO is primarily claiming that this won't be a deficit neutral bill simply because the tightening of enforcement of the tax laws is not going to produce what the Biden administration thinks it will. In deciding this, but CBO is practically alone. All of the other conventional authorities that have tried to evaluate this suggest, oh yes, if we tighten the enforcement of the tax laws, it is going to bring in the money the Biden administration is saying it's going to bring in. So the BBB is going to be a deficit neutral bill. I don't think CBO has called out the $285 billion tax cut as being the thing, that is actually preventing it, from being a deficit neutral bill. But I think that's why it's not a deficit neutral bill.
Well, it's interesting though, because the infrastructure bill is the one that's going to raise taxes on anyone making more than $450,000, right? That's in the infrastructure bill that passed.
No, I don't think that passed the infrastructure bill. I don't think they passed the tax increase in that.
Oh, they didn't? They took it out?
Not only did they take it out, that was evaluated by CBO after the fact, because it didn't have to be evaluated, because it wasn't a reconciliation bill. So after the bill passed, CBO got to its evaluation of that, and it was discovered that wasn't going to be a deficit neutral bill, that it was going to be $256 billion in deficit, which, by the way, from the standpoint of the economy, is a good thing. Because when you have $256 billion worth of deficit, which is flowing into the economy, it is expansionary for the economy.
It depends on who's sitting on the money.
Depends on who was sitting on the money, but even if the wealthy, is sitting on the money, it's still the case that 35 cents on the dollar is going to flow into the economy that otherwise would not have actually flown into the economy. So however you look at it, the $256 billion deficit is going to actually be an expansionary measure for the economy. But the basic point is here that CBO calculated that wasn't going to be a deficit neutral bill. And the conservatives, of course, had no trouble at all about even questioning whether it was going to be a deficit neutral bill. Getting the CBO score before they passed it, they happily passed it because they didn't care whether that had a deficit.
But I thought you said that they took that taxation of $450,000 households and above out of the bill. Is that not what you said?
But what I believe, but what I said specifically is that any tax increase that was originally supposed to be in that bill never made it through. That
Oh,
the
okay.
services were able to cut it out of the bill.
Okay.
In terms of the detail, okay, I don't know whether there's a $450,000 thing in there, or not. I didn't check the final bill sufficiently carefully to know that.
I'm gonna have to pull that up because my parents are like, did that get in? That's coming in December?" So that's why I gotta go look that up now because I got sick of even trying to pretend that anybody was actually getting a legitimate information flow on all of that stuff.
All right. Uh, okay. So anyway, about the salt tax, okay, a recent analysis from the Tax Policy Center says that raising the cap to 80,000 will benefit primarily the top 10%, okay, of income earners, with almost nothing flowing to middle, okay, and lower income uh, families. Also, the only part of the Build Back Better package that's currently larger than the proposed salt cap increase is the universal pre-K and affordable child care programs, both of which critics warn are deeply flawed and have been pared back in recent weeks to appease the right-wing Democrats. As the Build Back Better bill makes its way through Congress, significant changes are being made to the various proposals, generally for the worse, said the People's Policy Project and Matt Brunig last week. Quote, hollowed out versions of older proposals are limping to the finish line, and it's a completely different bill at this point. And somebody else tweeted, pretty wild that the second largest BBB measure will give a hefty tax cut to richer Americans. It'll get over 2 times the funding compared to the 1-year child tax credit expansion for middle and lower income people. Almost 2 times the funding. That's very ironic. There's a breakdown in this article of what the most expensive things are. The affordable child care and universal pre-kindergarten, that comes in at $390 billion. Increasing the SALT cap comes in at $285 billion. Clean energy and climate resilience comes in at $220 billion. Paid family, okay, and medical leave, $195 billion. Clean energy and electricity tax credits at $190 billion. Affordable housing, $170 billion. Medicaid, home and community-based services, $150 billion. And expand the child tax credit for 1 year, $130 billion. Tax credits for health insurance premiums come in at $125 billion. So last month, after President Joe Biden privately floated leaving SALT changes out of the reconciliation package, Chuck Schumer reportedly intervened to rescue the tax break, which one analysis estimates will deliver an average tax cut of $16,760 to U.S. millionaires. I think, since I'm hearing sounds that indicate that, I think that Lisa was dropped out of the stream and now she's back. Hi. Something went wrong. Hello, Lisa, can you hear me? I don't know if Lisa can hear me. I think she has.
I got it. I finally got it.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm glad you can hear me again.
Sorry, Joe.
Quite all right. Quite all right. So, outraged by the regressivity of the SALT proposal, Senator Bernie Sanders said to reporters on Tuesday that he's currently working on a compromise plan that would limit the provisions benefits for the wealthy. I don't know what that's going to be like. He said, quote, I am working with some of my colleagues to make sure we come up with a proposal that protects the middle class, but does not end up with an overall reconciliation bill in which millionaires are better off tax-wise than they were under former President Donald Trump, said Sanders, the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. So that's what's going on there. And David Sirota said, quote, after Democrats gutted their wildly popular initiatives to expand Medicare and lower drug prices, the tax initiative has now become one of the most expensive provisions in the BBB bill. And quote again from David Sirota, the whole initiative seems deliberately sculpted to hand the American right a weapon to bludgeon Democrats ahead of the election, unquote. Raising the issue of whether people like Sinema, Josh Gottheimer, Joe Manchin, okay, and others have been essentially deliberately trying to bring about a defeat of the Democratic Party because they really are Republicans, okay, at heart, or just because they sold out to the same donors as the Republican Party is. Anyway, right-wing groups are attempting to do just that. On Tuesday, Heritage Action announced a $1.25 million ad buy targeting Representatives Carolyn Bourdeaux, Democrat of Georgia, Cindy Axne, Democrat of Iowa, Jared Golden, Democrat of Maine, Alyssa Slotkin, a Democrat of Michigan, who also, by the way, is a refugee from the CIA, and Susie Lee, Democrat from Nevada. And they're trying to target them over the SALT provision. Their latest plan is to give $200 billion in blue state bailouts to their rich friends at the expense of all other Americans, declares the ad, which will run on television and online. And there was a spot here that is focused on by Jared Golden. And if it's focused on him, he has no one to blame but himself, because he's been selling out to wealthy people for ages. But anyway, in email on Tuesday, the Patriotic Millionaires, a group that supports higher taxes on the rich, argued that, quote, the last people who need government assistance right now are the well-off taxpayers who would be most effective by, unquote, the SALT cap change. And they continued in this vein with another quote, which I'm not going to read. So that's the SALT story for now. Let's start going into the comments and questions and see what we get there. The whole thing is pretty ironic, and the whole episode only reinforces the ideas of that control of the political system by the oligarchy.
It really is stark in that, for me, when all of this comes up. You're going to get that state and local tax deduction. And it was just a way to sweeten the pot for the people who have been getting, taxed the least all along. The bill's like a double whammy, and in the reconciliation bill that's got everything in it that, by the way, gets funded. It's federal funding, right? I mean, now we're getting into the whole MMT lens.
Yes.
It's coming from the same sources, and it's blatant. We're getting it screwed on both sides. On
Yeah.
both sides.
They
Come
get
and go.
okay on both sides. And it might be relevant here to mention that recently, let me see if I can quickly find this one. It was a recent piece from the Peterson Foundation, pgpf.org. It's called Debt Matters, and it's by Dana M. Peterson and Dr. Lori Esposito Murray. They both are centrists, rather long-standing. And in this article, what they talk about is the public debt is growing unsustainably, and despite the growing refrains to the contrary, debt matters. And then they proceed through to talk about a lot of different statistics about what's happening to the debt. They never confront the arguments from the MMTers about why the size of the debt is completely sustainable. In other words, that there are strong arguments from the MMTers that say that it doesn't matter what the level of debt is. It doesn't matter what the debt to GDP ratio is. So these people from the foundation, who are writing for the Peterson the foundation, are saying that it does matter, that debt matters, but they don't argue why, it matters. They don't question the reasoning of the MMTers. They also conflate the deficit with the debt continuously. In other words, the deficit isn't the same thing as the debt.
Right. But that's convenient.
It's convenient for them because they want to point to deficits that are very, very large, and to say that somehow these deficits are additions to the debt, and that matters. And they don't confront the arguments that say, no, the level of the debt and the level of the debt to GDP ratio matters not at all for the sustainability of a monetary sovereign such as the United States. So, but you're still hearing this refrain, in Washington, D.C., about how the debt matters. It's being published by respectable sources, quote unquote. Those sources refuse to confront, even when they mention the opposing opinions. They do not honestly confront the arguments of the MMTers and try to refute them. They just assume the MMTers are wrong. And then they try to scare you by citing the big numbers and pointing out to people how much they are per person, how much they're going to increase if they keep on the same track. They keep telling the same story they've been telling for years, in spite of the fact that in much of Washington, the narrative has changed. And in Congress, it's also changed. But they're still influential. They still represent a lobby in Washington that evidently Joe Biden still will listen to. I'm not sure why he listens to it, but he's been listening to it for his whole life, and maybe that's why. I don't know about that.
You have to want to learn new tricks, Joe.
Yes. Hard for a new dog to learn new tricks.
Oh, dog.
So I'll keep going down here. Kay says, New Zealand closes down the whole island pretty much. Well, that's not what that article said. If it closes down the whole island, it may do so for a very short time, but that's all. Not a big deal. So Lisa said, so Kay says that Lisa's audio is too low. Yeah, Lisa's been having some audio difficulties tonight. Holly Horn says 76 days documentary about the Wuhan, and that Kay has recommended. Quickly scroll through these. Lana says Stephen Howell has a few things to say about Scott Morrison. And she's right. He does have a few things to say about Scott Morrison. They're not very complimentary. And Steve Gonzo says, or Ghost Start says, my fully vaxxed nephew got CV, was hospitalized a few days upon release, was forced to go out of state for prophylactic aftercare meds, as literally nothing was available and offered. Very sick for 2 more weeks. Sorry to hear that, Steve. Lana Dell says Greenwald has turned into a jerk. Certainly about some things. Kay says, I agree, had to search everywhere to get my J&J booster, but where did he go? And Michael Dell asks, does Greenwald prefer the Brazilian approach to COVID? I don't know. I guess we'd have to ask him about that, because that one is nothing to write home about. Does Greenwald live in Costa Rica or Central America? No, he lives in Brazil. Lives in Brazil with his partner. He has a nice estate there, and he's got a lot of dogs to protect he and his partner. We're interrupted. We're back, folks.
That was weird.
The streams got interrupted. Sometimes it happens. It just cuts off the stream, entirely. Depends on internet conditions out there, weather conditions out there often. Ghostot says, I don't know. He's near Springboro, south. No, he is in Brazil. Michael Dell says he's in Brazil too. And Ghostart says, by Rio de Janeiro. I don't think he lives in the city. I think he lives in the countryside. And I continue to scroll down. The CBO head was an American Enterprise Institute scholar. That doesn't surprise me. CBO heads have been conservative since the first CBO head, who was Alice Rivlin. She was a Democrat, of course, but a real balanced budget type of Democrat. She was Peter G. Peterson's partner in crime until she died just a few years before he did. They both died fairly recently. He died, I think, only about a year ago. And Monadel says we are no fans of the CBO here. Yeah, we're no fans of the CBO at all here. And Michael Dell says The Intercept has a new article up about the CBO head. And Ghostot says, dear union workers have accepted the latest deal after a 5-week strike. 6-year agreement includes wage increases and retirement benefits enhanced. That's great. I hope they got the wage increases they were looking for.
Did they get rid of weren't they worried about tiers too? Didn't they have tier wage contracts?
I think that Kaiser had the tiers, and they were very worried about. I don't know whether John Deere had the tiers or not.
I think it did. But this is like the second go round, right? Second or third.
Yeah, it's like the second go round. The union leaders, I guess, had actually negotiated settlements, and the union rejected the settlements and continued to strike.
Right.
And so this has been going on for a long time, but they have fought hard, and they deserve everything they get. And let's hope they got something fair for a change.
Until people keep striking.
Yeah, let's hope people do keep striking. Rand Paul tells The Intercept that in all likelihood he will file a motion to force a vote on the $650 million missile sale to Saudi Arabia. Oh, that's interesting. Well, all I can say is good for Rand Paul on that one. And Michael Dell says, ha ha. And Kay says, hope they don't screw up Social Security with the stupid debt limit. I doubt that they will, Kay. Michael Dell says, aren't folks like Pete Peterson disingenuous in their concern for deficit spending? Well, Pete Peterson is dead. I'm not sure that he was disingenuous about that concern, but there are many people whose concern for deficit spending is very disingenuous because, of course, they never get concerned when it comes to military spending. They have no deficits concerns at all, when it comes to that. So, and Ghostart says, K. Ryan, Social Security is not affected by a shutdown. There's been some speculation at this time, because of the nature of the shutdown, that Social Security payments may be slowed down, but I don't think that's really going to happen because there's just an outcry about that. It's not also just an outcry from the elderly. There's also an outcry from their children who suddenly have to part with considerable money to keep their elderly relatives alive. It just puts a burden on too many people, and people are going to be very, very angry at both parties if there's no debt ceiling deal, that's made. So I suspect that one is going to be made, but of course, as you know, and as I've mentioned here lots and lots of times, it's within the power of the administration to short circuit that problem because they can mint a platinum coin. And the face value can be as high as they want, and they can get rid of the problem completely. So that is in the lap of the administration. Okay, and let's hope they decide that they are willing to act. They just seem unwilling to exercise the authority they have to do good things.
All we need to do is keep that in our discussion every time that you're out on social media. I mean, I know we do this anyway, but we really need to keep pushing that because lots of people are catching on. Even people that I'm talking to that are in my family circle are asking questions about this kind of stuff. And what's this mint the coin stuff? And they ask because they know what I do and what I've done, right? And I'm just like, yeah, it actually is all that simple.
Okay, do me a favor and mention my book to them.
You know what, Joe? We have to do a little bit more promotion of your book. I would like to do that this coming week out on social media and remembering to mention it, in the circles that I'm in off social media, but working around all of this stuff. I really would like to do some of that promo. You've got quite a few books that I would like to do that with.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I certainly appreciate it. But also, I did want to ask you, for the first time today, your photo has appeared in the graphic.
Yes, I saw that. I think it's great.
For this, okay. So is that the photo that you would want? Because if there's another photo that you like better, I can certainly get the other photo substituted, for your photo here.
I like that photo, Joe. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not going to go out and get headshots. So, the summer wedding that I was at is the best we're going to get. I might zoom it out a little bit so that it's not so close up, and maybe then you can just, that's easy. That's easy to change, but it's going to be the same photo.
Okay, so Bonnie says you look absolutely beautiful in that photo.
Oh, Bonnie, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so today I tweeted out. What did I tweet out today? Oh yes, in reply to Bill Goggin, who's an MMTer, okay, from way back, a follower, okay, of Stephanie Kelton. He said to avoid inflation, a government of a full employment economy with deteriorating infrastructure on a burning planet can spend on either if it can't get the money from the rich, question mark, can't pay for anything the same way we've paid for everything. Is that the message by which the Democrats are trying to send? I replied to that by saying, after all, we lack the authority to mint the $100 trillion coin, to license out the vaccines to manufacturers internationally, to use Section 1881A of the Social Security Act to provide Medicare for all during the pandemic, to fire Liz Fowler and appoint a PNHP stalwart to head the CMMI, and to eliminate all student debt, or license out overpriced prescription drugs to generic competitors. So that's what I had to say about that.
You know, I don't know. It's. I think we're at a tipping point, Joe. I mean, once
Well,
you let the genie out of the bottle with, I think, well, the genie's out of the bottle. Okay, I mean, when you get elected Congress members talking about MMT, talking about minting the coin, talking about stop asking us how to pay for it. We pay for every single program we put through the same darn way, right? You know, I mean, I've got 3 deficit myth books that are going out that I bought that I'm sending out to people this week. With one of them is going out with a red beret to Madeline. You know, the genie's out of the bottle, and once the genie is out of the bottle, you can't shove it back in.
It's hard to shove it back in, but they suppressed it
Yeah,
until
but I mean, people are smart and hungry.
of the deficit myth. They were very good at suppressing MMT for nearly 10 years.
Right, right. I agree with you, but we've got a movement going that knows. I mean, everybody's looking for solutions, right? Because we're in such a bad way. And when you have a hunger for information and real tangible solutions, okay, and we've got such a wide swath of the population who has not only, you know, been in dire straits, been at the bottom of the rung in, you know, just wages, no social safety net, can't make a living for the last 30 years, wage stagnation, all kinds of new jobs paying you $7.25 an hour, you know, it's just ridiculous in that sense. But what we've lost, the middle class has slid, and they've lost major ground. Okay, and
We've lost
even
a lot of the middle class.
a ton of it, right?
Yes.
And those folks are voters, and those folks,
And they're angry.
they're angry, and they're angry
Voters.
about the causes that are causing their anger are the same causes that everybody, it's all caused by the same thing, Joe. So
Right.
everybody is hungry for real solutions, and when there's a hunger for knowledge and somebody's giving truth, boom. So we
Yeah.
just got to keep
That
pushing
can
it.
change the situation.
Huh?
That can change the situation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what Michael Dell says, my earlier quote, haha, was in response to your comment about Abigail Spanberger being a CIA refugee. Good one. I made that comment actually in relation to Alyssa Slotkin, who's actually the representative from Michigan, but it applies equally to Abigail Spanberger, who is a CIA refugee as well.
I know that was good. I chuckled on that one.
Yeah.
That was so good.
And Lana says, Lisa, super awesome that people are asking about hashtag mint of the coin.
Hmm.
Lana says, Michael, we are no fans of Abigail either. There's one Abigail I'm a fan of, and that's my granddaughter. Her name happens to be Abigail. And Lana says, but Lisa, I think red highlights would be good. Get thee to the salon, laugh out loud.
Yes, and red highlight. All I used to even put. I used to make my hair lighter, but as I've gotten older, I have a decent amount of hair, but my hair is fine. And when I start coloring it, it just what you see is what you get, folks. Sorry.
Well, you have more than a decent amount of hair. You have very long hair.
Yeah, but it's not as thick as it used to be.
Well,
So and I I just I baby it so that it doesn't dry out and I don't have to cut it off. I've always liked my longer hair for whatever reason. So my great grandmother had hair down to her waist, and she would put it up in a bun on her head when she was 93 years old, and I'm headed down that path.
good for you. Solana says the deficit myth, but go Lisa.
Yep, I'm following in Lana's footsteps on that one.
Good. So we are. Oh, I keep forgetting to do this damn thing. Hang on a second while I do this damn thing that I have to do. Okay. So there it is. I turned on the thing at the bottom of the screen, which has the link to my Buy Me a Coffee page, which I
Oh,
recently set up. I recently set up a Buy Me a Coffee page. So in addition to the Patreon, I have a Buy Me a Coffee page. Okay, the nice thing about the Buy Me a Coffee is that it's unambiguous that you can make a one-time small contribution. Whereas you can do the same with Patreon, but with Patreon it's a little more complicated because you have to uh, sign up for a monthly contribution, and then once the contribution has been made, you have to immediately cancel it. So it's a little harder to manage that. But the Buy Me a Coffee thing is all one-time contributions.
Joe, we've got someone who was watching for the first time tonight. Michael Bell,
Oh, Michael,
DEL.
yeah. Well,
Thank you for
Michael,
being here, Michael.
yeah, thank you for coming. I hope you liked it.
Yeah, you know what? It's sometimes good to go back and just remember, like with the with the COVID, how out of control they literally let this get. They made choices to allow it to happen. You remember now we had almost a year before we had vaccines, and then
Yeah.
it was another several months before they were even able to get them into people's arms after they were where they needed to be. So
Right, but for me, one of the most amazing things is that they're acting now, okay, as if it's over.
oh yeah, I mean I'm so disgusted with that. I don't even know I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, it's just profoundly dishonest. When we had 1,025 deaths just yesterday, uh, I'm sorry, today, 1,432 deaths the day before, and 2 days ago, 526 deaths. So we were looking at, what is that? That's roughly, so that's 3,000 deaths over 3 days. So there's an average of 1,000 per day. That's a lot of people. It's not over. And remember, They are now talking about the very good possibility of a new wave of COVID hitting the United States in about a week or two. It's already all over Europe.
There's not a lot of good news out there.
No, there's not a lot of good news out there, and the administration just wants to look the other way, doesn't want to tell people that.
You know, it's a great reason to do a general strike.
It is a great reason to do a general strike, but I'm afraid that probably people will not be willing to do a general strike for the sake of that, because they've been associating that COVID with lockdowns damaging to the economy. They don't understand. We can handle it by using the strategies that New Zealand used, and we can greatly decrease the number of fatalities by using that strategy, and we don't have to shut down the whole economy. We don't have to have the weeks, of shutdown.
Hey, Shane's here.
In
Oh,
most
okay, everybody.
in most parts of the United States, we would still be able to lead a normal life.
I think that. Oh, I've got an echo. Why have I got an echo all of a sudden? I have been talking to friends of mine who at first were 100% against any type of a lockdown. Okay. They are a more conservative persuasion. They wouldn't know what MMT was if I wouldn't have started those discussions with them. Okay. But these are dear friends of mine, and politics is outside of our friendships. We take care of each other's kids, blah, blah, blah. And it's a couple, and the husband was talking to us, I guess, last month. We hadn't seen them for quite some time because, vacations and all kinds of stuff. But anyhow, we went out one night, and he says to me, you know what? All we need to do is lock this down for like 3 solid weeks. Get everybody ready, send them checks, tell them to go, stock up on what they need, get their prescriptions, get it all ready. If it takes 2 months, 3 months to get it ready, lock it down for 3 weeks. Nobody works. Everybody gets taken care of, and we'll open it back up, and we'll have it under control. Now, this is someone who, in every other regard, would never say this out loud. And he's telling his friends, his buddies, his coworkers, right? So have faith in your fellow human beings. They're sick of this too. Okay? And I know that everybody that's probably watching understands that the media spins this crap because they have to keep themselves, the corporations, and the admin in a good light. But the truth of the matter is that if you get this, if they were to get this variant, this new one, through testing, contact tracing, and spot outbreak lockdowns, and they'd have to be vigorous about it, we wouldn't have to watch this go crazy.
Yes, we wouldn't.
We wouldn't. There's no excuse for it, and we would not have to be in this awful situation where we've got analysis paralysis and no one knows what to do. Now, the problem with all that crap is that we decentralize liability and decision making all the way down to the municipality, right?
Yes.
Which is like, we're hopeless in that regard.
Right, which is what Trump wanted to do from the start so he could avoid responsibility for the pandemic. He tried to put it on the governors. He tried to put it, on the local authorities. He didn't want to be responsible for it.
Well, and he just wanted to keep everybody in his side of the camp happy, right? I mean,
Right.
I would kill for, go back into the 80s where we actually had some decent reporting and some fairness and some legitimacy to what was coming out of the TV. Some way, way better than what we got now, which is just ridiculous, right? But
Absolutely.
I think that what we've got now is a collective consciousness of people who are waking up and no longer at one another's throats because we're not getting a psychopath screaming at us on a regular basis, right?
Of course.
Now we have clandestine sociopaths in charge, and I think we know that too. And it's happened too quickly in too small a sphere. Everybody's starting to realize that you get a 1 year cycle of Congress, and that second year cycle of Congress, they're going to be out on the campaign trail, and there's nothing that's going to get done. Very little, if anything.
Right. And we tolerate that.
We wasted it, right? I mean, like, we did a show here, Joe, where we walked through the months of the year, and we didn't even get through all of it. But it was literally like, bury a bill, stall, pretend you release a bill, never gets out of committee, bury the bill. But while you're pretending to release the bill, go run around and lobby your congressman and get them to sign on to the bill that we never really released and buried. We're all sick of it. We all
sure are.
It's over.
I hope it's over. I hope everybody sees it.
I think everybody does see it. And I don't think there are any easy answers, Joseph. But if we, as an American people, just remember that we're Americans, damn it, and we need each other. As soon as you figure that out, if we can get back into that headset, into that mindset, that your neighbors aren't your enemies, they're people, and we need each other. We can take care of the rest of this crap. Don't get behind these people. Stop buying the media spin. Find like-minded people, talk to them. Don't talk Democrat or Republican. Talk, holy God, this is ridiculous. If I can get my friend to come to me and say, all we need to do is lock this down for 3 weeks, we can get anybody converted. I'm telling you.
I think so too. So Carmen says, super late, received but devastating news, but wanted to duck in to say hello.
What? Oh, Carmen.
Carmen, I'm really sorry to hear that. When you feel comfortable, please tell me what it is.
Hey, I wanted to say hello to Kay, and all the times that I've seen her in the chat, I've never said hello directly to her. Thank you for being here, Kay. Looking forward to
Thank you for always being here, Kay.
Yeah, she is. I know that we couldn't see her out on YouTube for a while, or maybe it was Facebook.
It was Facebook. It's Facebook. We couldn't see her. We can see her on YouTube.
Right. Okay. But I'm
fine.
well, since we've got time, I wanted to say hello and thank you.
Okay, so another word to Michael Dell, who says he wants to buy me a coffee. Where is the link? Well, the link is streaming across the bottom of the screen right now. Of course, it's the YouTube link at first, but then the last part of the stream says, please remember my buy me a coffee link, and it gives the buy me a coffee link, but also I also put the buy me a coffee link in the comments for you as well. So if you scroll down, you should be able to see that link. And there it is. And Dolores says, yes, we definitely need each other. Yeah, I think that too. I think at the start of this, we needed to get into the World War II head.
Yeah, we do.
And to act as though we were fighting that kind of war. In fact, we've lost more than twice as much people in less than 2 years as we lost in the 4 years of the Second World War. We only lost about 450,000 people in that war, and we're now up about 1 million.
We lose 450,000 people a year to poor surgical outcomes in hospital stays.
Yes.
Nobody knows that. Nobody realizes that.
Yeah, there are very few people, who realize it. But yes, I've known that that's been the case for some time. When I first started studying it, it was back in the 1990s. The figure then was something like 99,000. There was a study by National Academies of Sciences.
Yeah, because I remember it was a big deal. I remember that the hospitals, because they instituted penalty for mortalities at that point for hospitals, right? Which is part of the reason why, yeah, I mean, I could go into this because I know this evolution, but the truth of the matter is that it was a very big shocker when that news hit,
Yes,
right? Back when the media used to do valuable reporting. Um, and people were concerned about it was on everybody's list at the time. Everybody. And then we sort of just morph into the next phase of whatever, and we don't even talk about those things. I mean, very few people do, and it never gets picked up and run with.
yeah, that's also a consequence of neoliberalism. In other words, something happens, we realize it's terrible, we realize we have to do something about it, but the neoliberals in government just allow it to blow over. They do nothing, they ignore it, and they wait for the next piece of news to replace the earlier bad piece of news. And the problem just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse as the years go by. And it's never confronted. It still hasn't been confronted. That's why 450,000 people a year are dying now.
Well, I think that again, this all just comes back to you know, it's not it's not a caste, it's not a complex adaptive system anymore.
Well, it's not one that's working. It's what I call a Promethean complex adaptive system. That is not working because of the attempts by the managers to control everything. So Carmen says, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Joe. I will clarify when I get it together. And Jeff Denton is here. Hiya, Jeff. Good to see you.
Hey Jeffrey, how are you?
So are we going to keep acting like the squad has $20 trillion to buy out the BlackRock and Vanguard? I don't know. I'm not acting that way, so I don't know who we is, but I'm sure a lot of people are acting that way, as if the squad could buy out BlackRock and Vanguard.
This is one of the reasons why we need to start doing things like putting pressure on companies and universities, organizations to divest from those types of things. You'll be surprised how many of your 401k investments are, Vanguard, that selected and managed and run by Vanguard. You can put pressure, you can start those kinds of campaigns. It's another form of a general strike. I don't want my 401k invested with Vanguard. Well, gee, why? Right? You can come up with talking points and you hit up your corp. You get enough employees behind it, you'll make a stink.
Yes, we do have to put on that kind of pressure, and in this vein, we can recognize the Occupy Pfizer protest that was conducted on Monday by Shane Coughlin and the KRTD Media. I guess it wasn't actually organized by Shane, but Shane covered it. KRTD Media covered it. It was actually organized by Sharif Snuggs, to give him proper credit for that. But Shane was there covering it.
I'm really sorry that I couldn't make that, Joe. I was planning on it, but
So
I just wanted to say that. That would have been fun.
it would have definitely have been fun.
They did a good job, though.
With the speeches, yeah, with the dying part of it, all that was very well organized.
I didn't get any further than the speeches. I didn't see the die-in piece of the puzzle. I can go back and look.
Yeah, I mean, I think the die-in piece of the puzzle was. I'm not sure how impactful it was. I think the symbology was good. I'm not sure how.
Anytime we're going out and protesting in a big city with cameras on a
Yeah, it's good.
pharmaceutical company is good.
Yes, it's good. It's a help.
and it'll catch on if we keep doing them.
Okay, so Shane, also just to let you know, we didn't have any trolls here today. There were no fake Lanas. They seem to have gone, okay, at least for the time being. So I think your efforts are starting to be successful now. The efforts to get rid of them. And Lana asks, Jeff, would that be a reverse on the sellout procedure? Laugh out loud. I guess you could see it that way, Lana. Okay, I think we've come to the end of the comments. Okay, it's about 11:03. But thank you, Lisa, for co-hosting tonight.
Thank you for having me back. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long. I missed you guys.
Okay, I think you did a fine job.
I was just really supportive and listened.
So thanks a lot. And I'll see everybody tomorrow. I don't know what I'll be back with tomorrow, but I'm hoping that Lisa will come back tomorrow as well.
Yeah, I'm planning.
And that will have another really good conversation.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everybody. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Toodles, everyone.
Carmen says,
Thank you, Carmen.
Lisa's the co-host with the most. Kay says, thank you for the great discussion. Love you all. We love you too.
So sweet.
And we're so glad you're back.
Thank you. Yeah, I am too. All right, now we got to go.